Welcome to On Trial, starring Mark Radulich, also starring Sean Comer. Hope you're ready, Hollywood, because you're on trial.
All rise. Court is now in session. The Honorable Harry T. Stone presiding. This is On Trial, and tonight I'm your defense attorney, Mr. Mark Radulich, your mandated reporter, and frankly, I'm mortified. On the docket is the 1982 Wes Craven written and directed comic book adaptation, Swamp Thing. We're looking at all things Swamp Thing this week. We did a source material on the first volume of Alan Moore Swamp Thing comics from the early 80s. Jesse and I did a review of the DC Universe television show, Swamp Thing, and we're on to our very last show of the week, On Trial. Joining me in the prosecutor's chair, he's Sean Urinot. How you doing, Sean?
Dan Fielding for the prosecution, Your Honor, and I hate to say it, but man, we are sending an innocent man to the gallows this week. But first off, did I get the right character? Was Dan Fielding the prosecutor, or am I thinking of Marky Post?
No, he was the prosecutor.
I thought so. I thought he was the prosecutor. I didn't, because I loved Night Court growing up. I didn't want to dishonor it by getting that wrong.
That was one of my favorite sitcoms. I think my two favorite shows growing up as a kid were The A-Team and Night Court.
Yeah. So we grew up. You're a few years older than I am, so you caught a couple of shows that I happen to miss. So I don't remember the A-Team in anything except for syndicated reruns on, oh God, I want to say it was Fox KITN back in Spring Lake Park, Minnesota.
I used to beg my parents to stay up and watch the A-Team. It was the greatest thing in the world. All right, so yes, we are looking at the Wes Craven written and directed Swamp Thing. We talked before the show started tonight that if you're familiar with the sort of standard, most accepted version of Swamp Thing, that is Alan Moore's Swamp Thing, where he is a walking, talking plant god of the green, this ain't it. This is a pre-Alan Moore adaptation of Swamp Thing. This is Swamp Thing version 1. It runs slow and it crashes often. No, but to tell you more about that, here's the man with all the notes, Mr. Sean. Tell us about Wes Craven's Swamp Thing.
You know what? Incredibly, this thing is damn near lost to the mists of time. First off, to watch this thing, I couldn't go to Hulu, I couldn't go to Amazon, I couldn't go to Netflix. I had to go to Tubi. T-U-B-I. I had to.
By the way, did you check out Tubi? Did you see what all the goodness that's on there?
Oh my God! How am I just now learning of this site?
I only learned of it because I Googled how to stream Swamp Thing, and it came up in like Decider and a few other places pointed at Tubi. I'm like, what's a Tubi? So Tubi's a free movie streaming site, movie streaming app. You can put it on whatever devices you've got. It works for both Apple and non-Apple. And it's free. It just occasionally, I think, like one or two commercials that come up while you're watching something. But for the most part, like I said, you get a pretty straight movie here, and you don't have to pay for anything. And I'm like, and then I was looking through to see what else is on there. I'm like, holy cow! If you love hot garbage, this thing's full of it.
It reminded me of the early days of Netflix streaming.
Yeah.
Where I think I do believe. Oh shit! It's on the tip of my tongue. Okay, the very first movie I ever watched on Netflix streaming starred a bunch of forgotten Playboy playmates and penthouse pets as mercenaries for hire. Mm-hmm. Who had to stop Marcus Bagwell, dressed up as Tatanka, from launching a nuclear missile or something.
This sounds amazing.
It was called Day of the Warrior, and it was abso-fucking-lutely. I mean, well, what Bagwell was, he was a former Olympian who became a washed-up Olympian who became a professional wrestler and then became an arms dealer.
It seems like a natural transition.
Well, but that's an indicator of about what the early days of the selection on Netflix streaming was like. Like
Sure.
Back, I think it was in the first few months of when it was announced. This is about the quality you would have expected. It's about what you would expect. This movie is about what you would have expected to find on Netflix back then, and it's about par for the course for what you'll find on Tubi now.
Yeah.
So
my Tubi queue is like 20 deep right now, and it's all like drive-in movies, direct-to-video. The Masters of the Universe movie with Dolph Lundgren's on there, and
What?
I'm like,
oh my god! I didn't really have time to go through and set up a queue, but goddamn, now tomorrow morning, first thing when I catch a break from work, that's what I'm going to do. But goddamn, yeah, I had to find this thing had to be found on Tubi for me to find a reasonable way to easily watch it. In a first for On Trial, I don't have a box office gross for this thing. I looked. I couldn't find any box office numbers. I know that it cost $2.5 million, and goddamn, it looks like a $2.5 million movie. I know that the international uncut version is 2 minutes longer than the U.S. theatrical version, and there was at one point a bit of a minor controversy when it was released on DVD in the United States in 2000 because a Dallas woman rented the disc from a Blockbuster store for her kids, which was labeled as being the PG-rated 91-minute cut. And instead, she got the 93-minute international cut, which contained just a wee bit more sexual content and naughty bits. Which, is nothing ever actually came of this. MGM recalled and reissued it in August 2005 with the theatrical cut. 5 years after the. Would have been 3 years after those poor tykes might have very well had his or her puberty kick-started.
and this is why we refer to Adrienne Barbeau as Adrienne Barboobie.
Right. Otherwise, about the only real notes are that it actually received mixed to positive reviews from critics. Roger, I hate every fucking thing fun, actually gave it 3 out of a possible 4 stars. It was written off as being campy, perhaps a bit overly so. Wes Craven really kind of went to pains to step away from his horror wheelhouse because he wanted to demonstrate that he could pull off an action movie. Source material wise, and we'll get into this more in a moment, this movie really didn't have much of the good stuff to go off of. When we were talking for the show, we kind of sussed this out, and of course, Swamp Thing made his comic debut in 1972. Initial run was about 23 issues in the first volume. It was canceled due to fairly low sales, and then it reemerged in 1982. But what is considered to be the definitive Swamp Thing run, the one that really first established him as the earthly god of the green, with all the kick-ass powers that go with it, was Alan Moore's run, which didn't start until, I believe, 1984.
Correct.
Was what you said?
Yep.
Okay. So, it's kind of like, you thought Yeah, you thought the Green Lantern movie that we got was bad? Okay, imagine if sometime in the 70s somebody had gotten a Green Lantern movie together and all that they had really had to base it off was the Silver Age run when Hal Jordan is still running around referring to his Inuit mechanic as Pie Face. Yeah, and the ring doesn't work on wood. That's about what they had to draw from here. And actually, taking all that into consideration and considering that this is basically a rubber suit movie, we'll get more into this afterwards, but this really isn't that bad. Considering what they had to work with. But anyway, more on that in a moment, as I pretty much just already start shooting holes in my case. Mark, run this plot down for us, my good man.
All right, so we are in the American South, and a scientist is mysteriously killed. He is replaced by government worker Alice Cable, who is a gender-swapped Matt Cable, played by Adrian Barbeau. While there, she meets Alec Holland and his sister. They're working on experiments in the swamp there. They create a formula. There are also mercenaries working for, we'll find out later, Anton Arcane in the swamp, causing all kinds of havoc. They attack the laboratory. They shoot the sister, and in the midst of everything, this liquid, that they created, the substance ends up getting all over Alec, and he bursts into flames and dives in the water, and that transforms him into Swamp Thing. We then have a series of chases around the swamp between the mercenaries and Adrian Barbeau. Swamp Thing intervenes almost every time and tosses mercs left and right. Not a whole lot of gruesome kills here. It's a lot of Lou Ferrigno, Incredible Hulk-style tossing. We learn that this whole thing was set up by Anton Arcane, who wanted the formula so that he could make millions of dollars, etc., etc. Eventually, in order to put an end to the constant chasing and danger that they're in, Swamp Thing sort of offers him up for capture. So they bring the Swamp Thing and Adrian Barbeau, Alice, to Anton's lair of sorts. They feed one of the mercs the formula, and it turns him into a monkey-like creature. Where Swamp Thing then reveals the formula will work. Whatever you are is what it turns you into. So for him, he was a smart scientist who loved the plants and loved the swamp and saw beauty everywhere, and it turned him into a guardian of the swamp, so to speak. To this henchman, he was a dummy. He's just a monkey boy, and so a monkey boy is what he became. Anton thinks this is as good a time as any to then drink the formula himself, and it turns him into the Wolfman, who in my favorite part of the movie, grabs a sword, because you can't just be a Wolfman. Now you're a Wolfman with a broadsword.
That fucking suit.
So the whole time this is going on, I'm just thinking of like the Tex Avery cartoon. Oh, Woofy. Oh, Woofy. So Woofy grabs the broadsword and gives chase to the Swamp Thing. He stabs Adrian Barbeau in the boob. I know everyone who's heard me plugging that for the last month. Finally, I got to see it again after having seen this as a child, and apparently it's staying with me for 30-plus years. I got to see it again, and it's as glorious now as it was back when I was a child. Poor gal, stabbed in the boob. Swamp Thing beats him to death and stabs him with the sword. He uses the power of the green bit of moss to heal her, and she says, "Come back with me." Swamp Thing says, "No, my place is here." There was a scene earlier on in the movie where he tried to work with some of what was left over of his lab, and he kept breaking it because he's all thumbs now. So too much strength in the hands. Hands are too clumsy. He's just like, he's sort of accepted his fate that he is this now swamp monster. And Adrian Barbeau goes back to the land of the living, and he goes into the swamp to live as the Swamp Thing. All right, that's the 10-cent plot synopsis. That's really all there is to this movie. It's a lot of chase sequences. Go ahead, Sean.
Okay, so let's just get into the most objective gripes about this movie. This is an action movie where the action scenes are flat out bad. They are, with a tip of the cap and a raise of my Coke Zero to Diamond Dallas Page, B-A-double-D, bad. And they're bad because, unlike a lot of other 80s action movies, unlike a lot of other 70s action movies, there's nothing especially memorable about any of them. There is no creativity. You wish that Wes would have injected a modicum of the visionary originality into these scenes that he threw in to the kills in the 3 Nightmare on Elm Street movies that he worked on. It would have made them so much more fun to watch. It would have made me sit up in my chair on my couch just that little bit much more. If he would have gone out of his way to realize that the action in an action movie serves the same purpose as a chase scene or a kill in a horror movie. It's what you come to see. So you need some build to it, but you also need to really get inventive. And unfortunately, that's not what we got. That's not even remotely what we. I mean, this. We didn't really get Friday the 13th levels of creativity with the brutality here. As you said, it's just all that Swampy ever really does is just picks up mercs and yeets them halfway across the American South, just one after the other. He can barely be arsed to throw in a punch every now and then. I think about the most saucy he got when taking somebody out was the one time when he crushed the one dude's skull. You know, when he basically halfway went Von Erich Claw on it. That was about as out of the box as poor Alec Holland was apparently willing to think. But in a way, it kind of figures, because it's a damn slow-paced movie. I mean, this thing has about all the motion of rapidly cooling molasses when it comes to plot development. When it comes to when we're even introduced to our titular Thing of the Swamp. It feels like about halfway into the movie, because we're spending most of it with either, Swampy as a human being and palling around with his fellow researchers, or with Cable as she's trying to escape. Although I got to admit, Jude is far and away one of my favorite parts of this movie. Wes Craven somehow managed to find one of the rare non-sucky child actors and actually gave him some halfway decent comic relief lines. And managed to do so without making him over into Reggie the Reckless or Short Round. But at this glacial pace, we're finally introduced to Swampy when he pops up out of the swamp as Cable is jumping in and trying to swim for her life. Characteristically, lays waste to a few more mercs while they're in a boat, and yeah, I wish I could say there was much more to the movie than that, but it kind of sets the tone for about the next 45 minutes to an hour that comes after. We don't even really get to see much use made out of his regenerative ability, the thing that we spent so much of that first half hour building up as the whole reason everybody pretty much exists at this point, is this regenerative serum. And it doesn't come into play until about the final 15 goddamn minutes of the movie, unless you count the fact that, you know, he tanks clip after clip of bullets and just keeps on coming. I really can't say anything bad about Adrienne Barbeau as a character. Just kind of sidetrack briefly and get the good stuff out of the way. Ray Weiss is perfectly charming as Alec Holland in what is very much a Ray Weiss performance. I can see why Louis Jourdan got such high billing as Anton Arcane, because actually decent villain right up until that fucking suit. He was fine right up until then. He was an om-nomming scenery. His performance, was what it was. It was appropriately subtle, down to earth. It wasn't exactly mustache twirly. You kind of understood why he was after this serum. I rather enjoyed Dick Durock. Dick Durock? Okay, from now on, he is Dick Murdoch. we are going full wrestling fan here. Dick Murdoch is the Swamp Thing. Got to take my appropriate drink for the drinking game. He delivers this lumbering performance that, since we really didn't have the better fleshed out powers of Swampy that we would learn about in his later runs, he was pretty appropriate to what the character was at the time. I got very much from the way he moved a Boris Karloff as Frankenstein's monster vibe off of it, or maybe even a Kane Hodder as Jason Voorhees. In terms of really being able to act through some surprisingly well done makeup. What I liked most about it was the fact that, with the way it was structured, it was subtle enough that you could still kind of see a little bit of a resemblance to Dr. Alec Holland when you looked at just the right parts of the face, because it made a little bit of sense there. But that's also kind of where the sense stops, because this is where we have to get in to science doesn't goddamn fucking work that way. The way they explain this thing, you could have explained it something as having an unpredictable effect on cellular structure, or it interacted in a curious way with the flora of the swamp when the Human Torch, Alec Holland, jumped into the water. That would have made sense. But instead, evidently, it scientifically amplifies a person's personality?
Objection. Bill Cosby once told a story about what makes cocaine so wonderful, and he said, well, it intensifies your personality. Ergo, the substance was part cocaine. You make it good.
It's Bill Cosby. The better reason was probably because when you give them the magic white powder, they never see the roofie coming.
Oh, boo.
What?
I'm quiet. I'm setting up.
Fucking pudding shilling rapist. It physically manifests your personality. Nothing works that way. If you're going to go magic green juice, just make it supernatural. Don't try to give it a scientific basis first. I mean, because are we then trying to say that Anton Arcane had the personality of a Pomeranian on steroids? that hadn't been groomed since 2 presidential administrations ago? God, if they ever remake this, I hope they don't try to write that part in. Like, don't even write a joke to it in there. Just leave it out entirely. God, you want to talk about something that shows this was a $2.5 million movie? That fucking werewolf suit. Okay, the Jet Bear family and I, we watch a lot of Face Off, the Sci-Fi Network special effects makeup competition show. And one of the things that they always come back to on these things is they always have the models who are modeling the makeup try to move their face so they can see how well they can articulate through the makeup. And man, it's a death sentence if you go to scrunch your brows or open your mouth or wrinkle your nose or whatever, and that makeup just doesn't fucking move. If this had shown up on Face Off, they wouldn't have even had to look at or judge any of the other contestants. They would have just looked at whoever designed this and just said, "You out." Out. You bring shame upon our profession. That's a suit like, did they hire somebody's cousin? Could they possibly get some of that money refunded? It's just, I mean, and I'm torn on whether I want to criticize the plot because, again, I want to emphasize this, and I will come back to this after we've finished our arguments. They didn't have much to work with. They had the very Silver Agey 23-issue first run of the character. He had really no substance to him. He wasn't the anointed earthly protector of the green. He was just a scientist who had a bad day. Some people killed his wife, and he went off seeking revenge, which I believe after he had turned human, he finally got at the end of the run. Even that being said, the big gaping plot hole in this is at the start of the movie. We acknowledge that everybody in this movie pretty much knows that this Anton Arcane is alive. Okay? And this is the early 80s. This is the time of the big dick swinging, all-powerful U.S. military. You mean to tell me everybody knows who this guy is, and yet he's still drawing breath? Like walking around as a free man. Bullshit. This is implausible on par with Lex Luthor Real Estate Baron. Correction, it's implausible and stupid on par with that moronic plot twist. If you had just made him a fairly under the radar arms dealer. I mean, because over the course of this, how many people fucking have seen this guy's face by this point? Even before he ends up dead in a hillbilly swamp. And on a minor plot hole, no. Did we ever establish just who was running the store that Jude worked at?
The kid
Was that did I miss that? Was that ever clarified?
The kid runs the store.
It's just like his store?
Sure. Look, there's no child labor laws in 1982.
Well, especially not in the American Deep South.
Correct.
I mean, come on, we're talking about the place that the mid '50s forgot. I mean, that kid has got the sweetest gig in the world. No school, no parents, no bedtime, no adults lording responsibility over him. He's got his own gas station.
That's American ingenuity right there.
Holy shit. When I was a kid, I used to have to scrape together allowance to rent video games. But, and for all this, I'm having some fun, I'm yucking it up, I'm rambling, but the fact is, you can only forgive so much about this movie based on it being a product of its time. Because you can maybe write off the special effects to that. I get it. To a certain extent, you could even write off the shit-tastic action sequences. Fine. Fair enough. But what it's really hard to forgive is just how thin and Swiss cheese the plot is, the poor pacing, and just sometimes the occasional lack of being given any reason to care about some of these characters at times. I mean, okay, that's not fair. We're given, what am I looking to say here? We are given reason to care about them. But, in one of the rare times I really shouldn't have thrown that one out there. Because that's actually one of the things they did well. I apologize for the brain fart. I have no idea where that actually came from. What am I trying? The characters are actually okay. It's just that you often wish that they would have been given a better story. A better story, just a little bit, okay, a lot more logic to them. And I don't know, maybe just a little bit more of the tender loving care that Richard Donner gave the first Superman movie. In terms of kind of treating a character with a little more respect at times. But anyway, onward with your defense, sir.
So, I think the trouble that this movie gets... The trouble that I think this movie gets into is that, especially when looking at it from afar, now, even maybe 10 or 20 years ago, is it's compared to the modern comic book movie. There wasn't a whole lot of competition in the late 70s, early 80s in terms of that. I mean, you had Superman, and Superman is like the gold standard, but it was also sort of the odd man out. Most things, up until probably Tim Burton's Batman, I don't think comic books were regarded as anything but, this is children's stuff. And even if the themes and the content were adult-oriented, and many times they were, I think the vast majority of people looked at comic books as that's just stuff for kids. And it wasn't treated with the seriousness that certainly in 2019 that we treat comic books now as if they are, one could make the argument they are, modern myths. These are our fables. These are our tales. This is an inherent part of our culture. People live and die by this stuff. Gosh, it wasn't like that in the early 80s. You got to remember, coming out of the 60s and 70s, you had the drive-in movies. You had, as sort of a subculture of this, the stag films. You had these, the concept of the B movie, which ranged from like your blaxploitation films and your, women in cages, that sort of thing. If you look back at the old DVD collections, Something Weird, that sort of thing. And then going back even further than that, your universal horror monster movies, they had a certain look, they had a feel, and I think when Wes Craven took on this project, he was thinking more creature from the deep, and certainly not comic book superhero. Even and as Sean pointed out, and it bears repeating, the comic book creators weren't even thinking about Swamp Thing the way we know him now. So when you go back and look at that film, you really do have to take off the goggles of this is the God of the Green. This was intended to be and exactly what it was. This was a 70s Incredible Hulk style rubber suit monster movie. And this might be an argument for the prosecution, but hear me out on this. I think the problem here is, again, people know Wes Craven for The Nightmare on Elm Street. They know him for his horror career. They don't really think of Wes Craven as an action guy. And this was kind of his action demo. This was an attempt to show the studios, hey, I can do more than the horror aesthetic. I can do action movies as well. And he was sort of experimenting with this film. So I think, it's easy and sort of low-hanging fruit to go, oh, it's so bad, it's good. That's my defense. It's campy, it's kitsch, it's fun to watch, this Frankenstein-esque monster, sort of, throwing guys around like Lou Ferrigno's Hulk, and having them, having stuff blow up or tip over and have them fly through the air, a la every single A-Team action sequence. All that low-hanging fruit, let's evolve the argument a little more. Let's evolve the defense of this movie. This movie is a product of its time. If you watch movies from, let's say, 78 to 82, a lot of them looked and felt and were paced this way. This is not the height of special effects in the early 80s. Or, monster makeup. We're still, for a movie that was only 2.5, the budget was only 2.5 million, and as the wiki tells us, he was very proud to have brought it in on time and on budget. I guess that was a thing back then. They struggled with this sort of thing, trying to make movies like this. It very much looks and feels like a $2.5 million budget. This looks like a low-budget movie. This looks like a movie where the director got a very simple premise. There's a monster, he's protecting a damsel in distress, and everything else is just kind of Christmas ornaments on the tree. That's it. That's all the movie is. That's all it was ever meant to be. We're not making high art here. And I feel like that's the problem people tend to bring to film analysis is they contextualize things all wrong. They apply the context of every movie should be Tim Burton's 1989 Batman. Every movie should be Marvel's Iron Man. Every movie should be, the forthcoming DC's Joker movie, or The Dark Knight. Aim high in the Air Force. Aim for high art. Evolve comic book movies. Sometimes a movie's just a guy in a rubber suit running around throwing people. That's what the script called for, and that's what you got. There was no boom mics in the shot. There was no shitty editing. I actually enjoyed the sort of comic booky dissolves. We aren't going Ang Lee just dissolves and weird edits all over the place. By far, this is actually edited better than Ang Lee's Hulk, quite frankly. I thought that this movie achieved its intended goal. It doesn't take itself too seriously. There's fun to be had in some of these action sequences, but go back and watch stuff from the early 80s. Everything was slowly paced, with the exception of maybe Commando. everything just kind of takes forever getting there. I think it's hard now because, we're living in the Fast and the Furious pacing of movies. And we forgot what it was like for movies in the 60s and 70s where things took time to evolve. And so I think the movie's unfairly maligned because of that. I sat down and watched this today, and I had just as much fun watching it today as I did when I was a kid, and 6, 7 years old, whenever, however old I was when I first saw this. It doesn't take too long, for him to become Swamp Thing, and then when he does, there's extended action sequences of him tossing dudes, and Adrian Barbeau running in roughly a circle. It's great. It's, you do get a bit of evolution with the character. He starts out as mute and not really understanding what he is, very similar to the Swamp Thing we know now, and him slowly but surely gaining his speech and understanding what he is, and he's starting to explain, he's starting to realize what it means to be this new being, and then by the end of it, and Christ Almighty, this character has a better arc than some of the ones than some of the main characters from movies we've reviewed on Damn You Hollywood this year. He actually gets to a place and becomes something else by the end of the movie. One of the things we talk about on Trial is the craft elements. I got into the look and the feel and everything already, but the difference between this and your average B-movie, drive-in, nudie cutie, whatever you want to file this under, is you actually have a pretty good cast here. You have solid performances. Adrian Barbeau is fine. Perfectly serviceable as the damsel in distress. She's an interesting character. They gave her things to do. She isn't just, an incompetent who's falling all over herself and having to constantly be rescued. There's tension in those scenes. There's a couple of times where she tries to save herself and she's just overwhelmed by an army of mercenaries. But I thought, and even towards the end where she's reaching out to Holland and she, says, look, despite your condition, we can make this work. Maybe we can heal you. And, he, of course, rebukes the offer because he's accepted his condition as it is. But you're drawn in by her performance. As the other half of the lead in this thing, I think she does as much work carrying the film as Ray Wise does. And you have our villain who, have you ever watched an old Bond movie from back then? From, the early 80s Bonds? Oh, gosh. Who is Roger Moore. The early Roger Moore Bonds are roughly paced the same as this film. And a lot of the villains, kind of the same aesthetic, kind of the same performance. I thought Louis Jordan kind of nails that just fine. So, look, this is afternoon cable cinema right here. It's the perfect pitch for a Sunday afternoon between 2 and 4, just laying back on your couch and having some mindless fun with a movie that looks pretty good. And to apply sort of the modern contextualizations of, well, it's not Tim Burton's Batman, or any of the other movies I said, is to entirely miss the point and realize you're not dealing with that kind of movie. You're not even dealing with that time and place. The ability to create the 1989 Batmans doesn't really occur until the movie actually comes out. You're still dealing with late 70s movie technology here in the early 80s. Things don't start to evolve until the late 80s. So, calm down. Enjoy it for what it is. All right. Prosecution's last word on this? Hey, everybody. I really do hope you love the Radulich Broadcasting Network. Did you know that you can actually get paid just for listening to this podcast? I know it sounds insane, but it's true. We just discovered this free new app called Podcoin, and it literally pays you to listen to podcasts. Here's how it works. You listen to podcasts, and you earn Podcoin while you listen. Then you turn that Podcoin in for gift cards at places like Amazon or Starbucks, Or if you're a good person, you could even donate that Podcoin to charity. The more you listen, the more you earn. Here's what you do. Download the app right now on iPhone or Android, and I have a special code for you. Simply use our code MARKWED5. That's capital MARKWED 5. Capital MARKWED 5. MARKWED 5. And you'll get 300 Podcoin just for signing up. And if you listen to enough of us on there, you can get a cappuccino at Starbucks or an Amazon gift card on us. So go ahead and go listen to this podcast or virtually any podcast on Podcoin and sign up with code MARKWED5. I swear it'll change the way you listen to podcasts.
So, just to clarify, I never made, at least not intentionally anyway, a comparison in terms of quality between Swamp Thing and Tim Burton's Batman or other films of a similar echelon. The only reason I brought up Richard Donner's Superman was to illustrate that that is what happens when someone is really fascinated by a character and they go to the trouble to keep something memorable, to present something that people can be immersed in. It's something that, if we're even wanting to talk about man in rubber suit type movies or classic monster movies, the classic Universal monster movies arguably achieved this, and with much more threadbare resources and at least a comparable, if not lesser, budget. So, I mean, it can be done, and that's just exactly the thing. There's plenty that you can throw out the window in terms of it was a product of its time. Okay, I get that. They only had the first 23 issues of Swamp Thing to work with. Okay, fine. But this is Wes Craven we're talking about. Okay? Would it really have been that inexcusable for he and the writers to have maybe taken some liberties with the character and maybe not just gone quite so strictly by the book as they did? I mean, after all, we're talking about roughly the same era that gave us the Red Brown Captain America movies. You know, Captain America done stole a car, Steve Rogers Beach Bum, those movies, Captain America driving around in his van discovering America, that wasn't taking liberties. You know, the Incredible Hulk TV series, you know, that never embellished or stretched things a little bit. And sometimes you do something like that in one medium, and it ends up actually kind of translating over into the other in terms of, hey, that actually wasn't a half-bad idea. Let's go ahead and run with that. I mean, when it comes to Batman the Animated Series, that was how we got vastly improved takes on Mr. Freeze and Scarecrow and the introduction of Harley Quinn. It revived Poison Ivy as a viable Batman villain. So it can be done. It can often be beneficial. But here it just seems like so often Wes was at its most forgivable, just playing out of his element, and at worst, almost maybe coasting a little bit. And I hate to say that. I mean, granted, this wasn't Nightmare on Elm Street Wes Craven yet, but by the same token, this was also the same Wes Craven who had already made The Hills Have Eyes. So you know that this is a man who can do a lot with very, very little. And it just seemed like, for the most part, he just wasn't really getting that inventive with anything that he was shooting, or going out of his way to make anything all that memorable, to give you something that would kind of stick with you a little bit. I mean, yeah, great, he brought it in on time and under budget. That's a testament to his professionalism. But at the same time, bad writing is also bad writing. And there is some
bad writing going on here. Most notably, again, everyone is apparently aware of Anton Arcane and that he is a bad man, and yet he's still walking around free as a bird. He's basically a human boogeyman. And this is when the United States military, the United States government in general, was supposed to be just about the most all-powerful, ass-kicking entity the world had ever seen. Kind of doesn't exactly line up. You know, a little more care could have been taken with some of the plot holes, and had you done that, we would have maybe gotten a movie that would have lived up to the fact that Adrienne Barbeau, Louis Jordan, and Ray Wise all actually turned in some damn admirable performances. But really, if we're to boil it down and be entirely fair, the worst crime I could charge this movie with is being made several years too soon. And that's just unfortunate, because nobody making this could have predicted that the seminal, definitive Swamp Thing run would come along just 2 years later and be helmed by one of the great visionary creative geniuses of his medium, of his generation, or of any other, to be perfectly honest. There was no way anybody could have known that. At the time, they just saw it as something that could be fun, might maybe be profitable. Turns out it probably wasn't. And what they did end up getting was something that was good enough to spawn a sequel. Not a good one, but a sequel. And that eventually gave way to a live-action TV series that ran for 70-some episodes, and animated series that got a pretty healthy little run out of it. And up to today, when, thanks to his having appeared in the Justice League Dark animated movie and being a featured character in Injustice 2, Swampy has maybe made a little bit of a minor comeback. But still, even despite all that and everything that's kind of come afterward, it's hard to watch Swamp Thing and not think, oh, really wish you would have held off for just 3 more years, and you might have had a movie that we might be talking about right alongside Superman and Batman.
I actually would love to know, like, when Wes Craven makes a decision, I'm going to do an action movie. I want to do something people know because I want this to kind of be my resume for doing other things besides horror. And I'm curious to see what was his short list of IP he was looking at, where, and what then DC/Vertigo decided they were okay with. I'm wondering if, did he walk in with, I'm doing Batman, and no, the fuck you're not, But he's like, I want to do Firestorm, well, show us a treatment. Nope, not doing that either. I'm really, when the horror guy walks into your office and says, I want to do a superhero film, and they're all kind of looking at each other like, what does this maniac think he's going to do? Now, in 2019, we just had Brightburn a few months ago, which is like evil Superman, and there was talk, and there's Superman Red Sun that's out there, and my God, every element that you can play with a character has been played with some of our top tier ones. So now, when you say something like that in the world of what ifs and elseworlds, it's like, oh, what would have been the big deal? But back in the late 70s, early 80s, it's, I would have loved to have known what that conversation was like and what he originally think. Or did he go in thinking, I am committed to Swamp Thing, I want to do Swamp Thing? Because I'll tell you this movie, in retrospect, does really come off like, I just want to put a thing out there. I don't really care about the character. I just, I want to I have this idea, I want to make a film, and I want people to see it. And that was those were the variables in the equation. but that's just me being film guy. As just a fan, as just a guy sitting on my couch killing time until I can go back to work, it was just a fun experience. You know, it was a goofy movie starring some pretty decent actors, and the 90 minutes went by pretty quickly.
And you know what? My in-character nitpicks aside, I enjoyed it. It's not one that I would make an annual viewing out of or something, but I think the best way to possibly sum things up is kind of along the same lines as what I've said about Rob Zombie's first Halloween movie, or Halloween 3, for that matter. It's a movie that for me is kind of hurt by its branding.
Yeah.
As just a rubber suit monster movie, it's pretty fun. But knowing what I do of the character and knowing how much better stuff is out there and how much I would really love to see a live action movie based on that stuff, it just kind of falls a little bit flat with me. But when I can put that aside, I can acknowledge just how objectively fun it's capable of being. It's well shot. I'll give it that much. Again, has a decent villain right up until the stupid fucking ending. Where it should be noted before he becomes the derpy sword wielding Wolfman, he first briefly transforms into Pizza the Hut.
Yes, and then he emerges from his cocoon like Metamorphosis.
I'm sorry, it's going to be hard to keep a straight face now because I'm imagining that moment when he's in the burnt pizza cocoon, and I'm trying to tell what the hell he's supposed to be. What personality trait is this supposed to be manifesting?
He's clearly a dogged, an evil dogged monster. He's a monster of a human being. He has no soul. We all know dogs don't go to heaven. Stop me before I reference another stupid movie.
You shut your whole mouth and don't you ever disparage Payday in my presence again.
All right. Anything else, sir? If not, I think it's time to let the jury go.
You know what? If you happen to have 90 minutes free, bop over to Tubi, check it out. I think it's certainly worth it because, hey, if nothing else, Adrian Barbeau gets punctured in the tit.
And really, that's the high point, the selling point of this movie. All right, we're closing off the week here with a pair of shows for you tomorrow. We've got Good Omens. We've got a TV party for that. And then myself and Robert Winfrey will be doing boxing coverage for Vladimir Shishkin versus DeAndre Ware on Showbox. Then we're doing another boxing card. Sergey Kovalev versus Anthony Yard on ESPN+. We'll be doing live coverage of that. That's for the WBO light heavyweight title. The next time you can catch On Trial will be September 19th. Sean, you and I will be putting on the docket The Dark Crystal, speaking of the 80s. Jim Henson's The Dark Crystal, currently showing on Netflix. So that's the next one that we're going to be doing. And I'm gonna put you on the spot right now. So you got to prosecute this one, I got to defend it, but I've defended a number of these lately because I love to defend. I love to defend the terribles. What do you want to do here? You want to prosecute or you want to defend the Dark Crystal? I'll give you first choice.
The original Dark Crystal.
The original Dark Crystal.
Is that available for streaming right now?
Netflix.
On Netflix. Well, yeah, it would be because, of course, it would be because they've got their prequel series coming up. You know what? Go ahead and defend it. I will go ahead and prosecute this one.
All right. Go ahead and do your plugs.
Okay. If you, for some God fuck knows what reason, just can't get enough of me here, feel free to follow me over at twitter.com/comercodex, COMERCODEX. Lately, most of my rants have been centered upon my surprisingly successful efforts at losing some weight. Of course, obviously, lots of ranting and raving about Overwatch and Dead by Daylight if you like that kind of thing. And also, it is where I regularly update when I am going to be streaming over on Twitch. My channel there is twitch.tv/comercodex. I've been having kind of an off and on last couple of weeks. Things have been kind of hectic, what with Jet Cub starting high school and other stuff going on. But I'm looking to get fully back in the saddle on Mondays. Mondays are typically either Dead by Daylight or Overwatch. Tuesdays and Wednesdays and Fridays are almost always going to be competitive Overwatch, usually at least a 3-hour block from 7 p.m. until 10 p.m. or so. Or if I'm feeling froggy, if I'm feeling spry, it's going to be pretty much right up until just whenever I decide to stop playing. So I hope you've enjoyed that. I hope you've enjoyed the show. I hope you enjoy everything that we do. Please, by all means, give us a listen, give us a like, give us a recommendation via Podcoin, Spreaker, iTunes, or wherever fine podcasts are found. I'm Sean. You're not. Never dull your colors for someone else's canvas.
All right, thank you for joining us for this edition of On Trial. Be well, be safe, and behave.